Today let's talk about one of the finer points of the charge and fight phase that can most definitely be used to win big advantages in the game of 40k. Let's talk about the heroic intervention. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where today we're finally getting round to a video I've been meaning to make for a while, an overview of heroic intervention, going back to basics for how it works, talking about a few of the tricks that you can do with it, and how you might be able to play around heroic intervention if you think it's going to be a big deal when you're trying to line up for some charges. I would say that heroic intervention is one of the more fiddly rules of 8th and 9th edition. I don't think it's particularly intuitive to newer players, and sort of represents a mini counter-charge type rule, particularly your heroes and characters stepping up to the plate when the enemy charges squads nearby, or even just a desperate push from your own squads to repel the foe from objectives. It can be a bit of a gotcha mechanic in 40k, one that's really quite easy to forget or not see coming if your opponent uses it on an unexpected unit, or even just makes a very slight movement mistake, and it can be truly game-changing if certain units get an entire extra fight phase for free. In general, as part of pre-game discussions, it's often a good idea just to mention which units can heroic intervene, and ask your opponent if they have any similar abilities. It's worth talking it through when you charge as well, establish which things can heroic intervene, and deliberately position your models so you're either within the range or out of the range, so no one's confused or unhappy when you get to doing the intervention. As for how it actually works, it happens at the end of the charge phase. The player whose turn it is declares and rolls all of their charges, and then the other player, the one who isn't charging, gets to sort of return in kind with a few heroic interventions if anything is in range. Typically it's a rule for character units, though there's a whole ton of normal squads that just get this based on their datasheet, and a bunch of stratagems that allow certain units to do it too. You can select a character to heroically intervene if it's within 3 inches horizontally and at least 5 inches vertically of the enemy. So say for example these Chaos Space Marines here, who have strayed too close to the Space Marine captain, who's going to decide to go over and punch them with his Power Fist. Importantly, and something that caught out a fair few people at the start of 8th edition, you can heroically intervene against enemy models whether or not they've charged. It means that even if your opponent just moved their models to be quite close to your character and forgot that they should be keeping 3 inches away, it is a potential way to get a completely free fight phase out of that. Provided you are in range, you can then move up to 3 inches closer to the nearest enemy model, most often to try and get in an engagement range, but sometimes you might not want to, and it might just be a way for your character to get a couple of inches of free movement should they want to. Sometimes that could be potentially important for things like objectives, or just getting your character nearer to their next target. It's not all good times for the heroically intervening characters though, as they won't necessarily get to strike before the targets that they've heroically intervened into. Heroic intervention isn't a charge, so you don't get to fight first, and it means say if these Chaos Space Marines had just charged into something else and then your captain heroically intervened into them, the Chaos Marines would typically get to fight first, potentially attacking the captain and maybe having a chance to kill him. Pretty unlikely for this particular combination of models, but that can be a really big deal. Otherwise though, if neither of the units had charged, typically it will be the character that heroically intervened that gets to strike first. The way the fight phase works is that all charging units strike first, and then for non-charging units you alternate, starting with the player who didn't do the charging. So basically the player who heroically intervened should usually be able to strike their character first if it is going to be important. So hopefully if these guys hadn't charged, then your character could jump into them and hopefully smash all these Chaos Boys with the Power Fist before they even get to hit you. Moving on, let's talk about a few potential uses for heroic intervention. First up, it can just be completely opportunistic. If your opponent positions badly or finds their units out of position because they failed a charge or something, it can just pretty much grant you a free fight phase, which if the character is significantly more powerful than the unit that they're going into, is often going to be a good thing. This Space Marine captain will very much enjoy tearing apart a bunch of Chaos Marines in the player's own turn, never mind what he can do in his turn. He can also use it opportunistically to gain some movement if it is important. While he's busy heroically intervening, piling in and consolidating, he could gain a significant amount of movement, first going towards them, maybe killing them, and then consolidating away from them, hopefully towards his next prey or an objective. Theoretically, he could be going up to 9 inches of movement this way. Next up, as I have mentioned before on the channel, it can be quite a powerful ability for defending objectives or just denying key areas to the foe. Here we have a captain who's planted himself on an objective, maybe just very slightly towards the side that the foe will be coming from. Now if the enemy tries to sneak away that objective by putting a light unit to take it from the captain, he'll be able to step up and clobber them. They can't just whisk it away from him by moving up close to him and not fighting him in combat. It means that any squads with the heroic intervention rule are absolutely great for contesting midfield objectives. Say the fairly hardy Celestian Sacrosancts moving up onto a midfield one. If your opponent tries to ping an Obsec unit towards them, they should hopefully be able to step up and just cut them down with their halberds, and keep the objective the Adeptus Auroritus. Having a lot of heroic intervention throughout the army, or having a general purpose stratagem that can use it, will often just mean that the opponent really can't afford to put units close to your units. You could think of it as a bit of an exclusion zone around your army, where you get to do nasty fight phase things if they stray too close. Limiting the foe's mobility by forcing them to step back is no bad thing at all. Next, you can use heroic intervention for defending units, which I believe was probably the main intention for the rule in the first place, but it's a bit less common than you might expect. In particular, if you have squads with really small base footprints, it can be possible just to completely cover a squad, so that if the enemy does charge them from any angle whatsoever, they'll also be fighting your character. Maybe a lot of the time the enemy chargers could handle the squad that they'd be going into, but if they're forced to take on both the squad and the character, then it could end very badly for them, and they might just get cut down for their presumption. To be honest, this is perhaps easiest to achieve with multiple characters working in tag team. Say for example, if you had a Space Marine captain and lieutenant both standing right next to each other, there'd certainly be no angle that you could approach them where you could fight the one, where the opponent wouldn't have the opportunity to heroically intervene with the other, and hopefully hit you back very very hard with extra combat damage. With all the good stuff that you can do with heroic intervention though, I would remember that it's not always an auto use, because your opponent's often going to get to fight first, and even if not, you certainly will be able to be targeted after you've done any damage and failed to kill the squad. Sometimes actually heroic intervening into engagement range could be the absolute worst idea, even if it could give you a chance to do some more damage with your fighty character. For example, the Space Marine captain maybe isn't fancying his chances quite so much with a big unit of 10 Chaos Terminators. Sure, he might kill a few, but then might well just get cut down in return, and it might just be far more sensible to wait until your own turn, maybe shoot down those Chaos Terminators with a bunch of other units, and then send in the captain to clear out the last couple. There are a few special cases with heroic intervention. Some units, characters and stratagems allow for a 6-inch one. It's quite common on a few warlord traits and certain champion style datasheets, say for example the Black Templars Emperor's Champion or Castellan Crow. This is just a bit of a powerful quality of life one. It means that all the tricks that you could do with a 3-inch one are just so much easier to achieve with these rules. It allows you to reliably protect bigger squads from all angles, and creates a much bigger exclusion zone around your dangerous combat units. Space Wolves in particular will absolutely love this, as just for one command point they can have this pop up on any unit with their countercharge, and that can be a definite gotcha moment, a surprise massive heroic intervention if you do forget it exists. Another really important one to be aware of are the Fights First and Fights Last abilities, both of which are amazing with heroic intervening characters, as they'll often both make the difference as to whether or not your unit gets to fight against the enemy first. Fights First should allow you to get the jump on any enemy units that haven't charged you, whereas Fights Last should just generally mean that you strike before them, whether or not the enemy has charged at all. It makes heroic intervening on things like the Judicia, Foul Blight spawn from Death Guard, or the Armour of Ross on Space Wolves extra nice. It means their Judicia will be great for defending Blade Guard. The Armour of Ross is a really nice and powerful Space Wolf relic, particularly with their 6-inch heroic intervention. It's hard to keep that powerful Fights Last ability out of the fight, and it's often a fairly common combo to see something like a Foul Blight spawn, Lord of Contagion, and some fighty Terminators for the Death Guard. The Foul Blight spawn can essentially break your charges out to 6 inches, and with the small unit footprint of all three of these guys, they can cover each other quite well from a lot of combat angles. The Terminators can even heroically intervene in one of the plague companies. This is certainly a little formation to be very wary of charging. So now we've talked through a few of the more useful things about heroic intervening, what's the best way to approach units that do have the rule? Perhaps the single most important thing is to always be aware of the enemy units that have it. Obviously don't forget about any characters, but bear in mind some other units that might be able to. There's all sorts of rules that can confer heroic intervention on certain units, and perhaps the best way is to ask your opponent before the game. For example, Sanguinary Guard have a stratagem that allows it, Celestian Sacrosancts have it on their datasheet, Vita Bloat Drones and Necron Canoptic units can activate it with a stratagem. Big vehicle characters such as Orc Kill Rigs can heroically intervene, but you might not often think of them as characters in the traditional sense, and some units get heroic intervention on steroids, say for example that powerful Salamander stratagem where a unit can jump in 2d6 inches to try and rescue some of their friends, as well as just being aware of the units that can do it and making sure that you're out of heroic intervention range if you need to be. Some of the skill might also come with weighing up the risk of what your units can do with their movement. For example, it might be absolutely fine to put them in heroic intervention if you think that you can shoot the character dead in your shooting phase before it comes to charges. It might also be absolutely fine to put the unit in heroic intervention range if you're planning to charge another weaker unit elsewhere. You just want to weigh that up against the risk of failing the charge and having the powerful character strike you down. The interactions can get a little bit complex depending on what you're dealing with. Otherwise, sometimes even in small units it might be perfectly possible to avoid a heroic intervention. Say if this Chaos Terminator unit is wanted to charge these intercessors, at the extremities of the unit it might just be possible to just get within engagement range of the outermost intercessor and be just outside of 3 inches from the Judiciar. You can then use your pile-in and consolidate to get all the models in combat, and hopefully cut down some of the intercessors without actually having to fight the Judiciar itself. The Tempora Mortis goes off at the start of the fight phase, so that should be quite avoidable. Otherwise, I would be aware of the opponent's own models blocking the character's path to the fight. Perhaps even if we were within 3 inches of the Judiciar in this situation, they might not actually be able to get into engagement range if there are multiple enemy models holding them back. To actually get into the fight, they would have to be within 1 inches of your models, and they might not be able to fit their base through the intercessor's bases to achieve that. I have had a couple of situations where the opponent just couldn't heroically intervene, even with a massive 6-inch heroic intervention, because it meant that they would have to essentially go back out of their own unit and go round, and there wasn't enough movement for that. Terrain can also be an issue as well. You can't have a character finish its movement halfway through ruined walls, so that might also keep them out of the fight. Otherwise, if it's doable and you have the force, you might be able to just charge the character with something else, maybe even just a chaff unit to tie them up and stop them doing things, or just go in with so much raw power from your combat squad that the opponent would be foolish to heroically intervene against them, as that way they're just going to get their character killed as well as whatever you charged. Just in general terms, I do tend to find heroic intervention is relatively easy to avoid, unless you're dealing with multiple characters or very small units that they're protecting, or you absolutely need to get in range of something like an objective marker. It just depends on how well your opponent has managed to position their models and consider what angles you might come in from. So I hope the heroic intervention discussion has been kind of handy. Please let me know what you think down in the comments below, and let me know if there's any other sneaky tricks that you think I've missed that I should have included in the video. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k content coming, including plenty of general strategy tips like this. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the things on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find that down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, such as seeing certain videos early. I think this one will be one of the ones for early release, voting on polls to see what sort of things come next for the channel, and again thank you guys for voting for this one. It was a fun topic to cover, and entry into the regular monthly prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big 40k kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.